True story. I once cussed out a fly for landing on my bath towel. Be advised. Hey y'all, I'm Jen. I'm from Oakland, and I'm a queer, black, feminist scholar.
This is Darren, hailing from the mean streets of Anaheim. I'm an introvert, a novelist, and a nerd.
We're early 30-somethings with 3 kids and over a decade of marriage.
This is a podcast about the realities of blackness and adult life. We do adult differently.
This is That Black Couple. Hello. I hear that you all bougie people don't drink brown liquor, so you can grab your gin and your juice and have a seat. 'Cause it's That Black Couple. This is Jen.
This is Darren.
And we're going to get started with episode 3. So this week we're talking about toxic masculinity and the black family. And we'll do, for the first section, first things first, we'll talk about how we were introduced to toxic masculinity and what it means in our lives. For the conversation, we'll actually talk more about the shows and stuff that we watched growing up in the 90s and even the shows that we watch now. And in reflection, we'll talk about how toxic masculinity shows up for us in our daily lives and also how our upbringings and our experiences with our mothers, our experiences now, have changed our perspectives on masculinity and what it means for us now.
And before we get started, make sure that you follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at ThatBLKCouple. You can find us on the web at thatblackcouple.com, and you can find us on Facebook at ThatBlackCouple. Let's get it started.
Okay, so this is an interesting topic because how did we come up? We came up with this one day in the bed. We were laying there, and I was like, we should do an episode on toxic masculinity. And then we actually planned the entire episode before we fell asleep.
Yeah, I think this was like the part of the genesis of the podcast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think when we were talking about it, we were talking about the fact that we both come from single parent households growing up with our moms, and how we interacted with masculinity was interesting because we grew up in matriarchal households.
Right. And
for me, my main thing was that my mother was very critical of men growing up. She was very leery. She was like, I don't know. I don't trust it. And, that went like male leadership in my church and, men in entertainment. Shoot, we couldn't listen to Smokey Robinson. She didn't trust him.
Who else? Like, you didn't. We were talking about this the other day. That
the DeBarges.
Yeah, the DeBarges. You can listen to.
Couldn't listen to the DeBarges. She was like, they too light skinned, and I know they only getting that money because they light skinned. They're not even that talented,
And there was a comedian too, right?
Yeah. Red Fox.
Red Fox.
Didn't trust him. So I didn't really have a lot of exposure to masculinity in my household. So I interacted with masculinity through television shows and church. I had an older brother, but he's much older than me. And my dad didn't live in the household. I had uncles, but it wasn't like I came home and there was a male figure in the house.
Right.
So I learned a lot about men from TV and actually from cousins or deacons or pastors. I don't know. It's funny because in some respects it's like, oh, that's sad.
I mean, it worked.
It absolutely worked.
I know for me, I kind of had a similar thing, right? So I grew up in a single parent household with my mom. I didn't have a lot of male figures around. I had an abundance of women around everywhere. They were always, there willing to help me and guide me. But I had that same thing where I didn't have a lot of strong male figures really present in my life. And so I had that same thing where watching TV is kind of where I've got a lot of my ideas of what masculinity is and what it's supposed to be and what it's not supposed to be. And I think a lot of people, even when they do have male figures in the household, really get that same kind of influence from watching TV and movies because it's that social entertainment aspect of like kind of subliminally sending you these messages of this is what a man looks like. This is how a man operates. This is how a man treats a woman. This is how a man walks through the world. And I like that. That was kind of how we came into the idea of really talking about toxic masculinity, because I think people talk about toxic masculinity a lot, but not so much from an entertainment focus, and how we were kind of born and bred and raised on these images in the media, and how that influences who we are and how we view masculinity.
Right. Then, so I have to ask you, because, you're a dad, and the fact that you did grow up in a single parent household, and it was a matriarchal kind of environment where you grew up, where you had a lot of women who were around, then how does that factor into you being the male role model of young Black boys? And then also, how did you come to really learn what parts of masculinity were toxic and what parts were non-toxic and worth keeping?
Both very good questions.
Are they?
Very, very good questions. To start, I think when I think about growing up as a kid and not having a dad that was really around very much, and having to kind of figure out what masculinity was supposed to be and what it was supposed to look like, and trying to decide what kind of adult I wanted to be, I really did look at TV shows and say, I want to be that stand-up dad who's there and is always around and is, the best, and is always hoisting on people's shoulders and lauded as the best dad ever and the best guy ever. And he's, the paragon of what masculinity is supposed to be. So early on, definitely the Cosby Show. Definitely the Cosby Show.
That's rough.
It's very rough. Hindsight, it's really hard to look back now and say that was a big influence, but it was. And it was, for me, it was a big influence because, Heathcliff Huxtable was on the show a great dad. He was always around. He was counseling his kids. He was affluent. He had a great job. People in the community looked up to him. They asked him for advice. He gave it. He supported people. He pushed them towards their dreams. And at the same time, he also wasn't, just soft and nice. He was hard when he needed to be. And so for me, it was like, okay, this is an idea of how you can really be that figure. That, this is the example of the Black dad, right? Yeah. Especially when you think about all these ideas of Black dads being absent and not really, and even if they aren't absent, not really being active in their kids' lives, or just being present and not being there emotionally with their kids. To me, Cliff on the Cosby Show, he crossed those lines. And so that was a big deal.
But what's funny about that now, not funny, haha, but funny about his intention in situating Cliff in that kind of very respectable position of I'm going to break the stereotype. I'm going to make Cliff different from the narrative. It falls right in line with Cosby's whole pull up your pants and don't name your kids Bonquisha, right? Exactly. And his anti-Blackness in creating Cliff in that way. And what's funny is that people always talk about art mimic life, or does life mimic art? And I really, it's very sad to me that people don't understand that so much of our lives are conditioned by what we absorb as children from the television, especially for me. I know for you too, we were latchkey kids. Right. I walked home from school and I was home by myself, for hours. For hours, I'd be home from school. What do I do at that time? I do homework, but I watch TV. Of course I watch TV. And so I watched a lot of television. I watched Nickelodeon for legit 4 hours a day. This is before the CDC or whoever else was children should only watch 2 hours. This is before there was a such thing as screen time. Right. We didn't know shit about that in the 90s. Screen time. Nigga, I'm watching
Screen time was every time.
Exactly. Screen time is all the time. So and that's the funny thing. You're talking about Cliff, and it's just so triggering for me because I couldn't stand Cliff. I couldn't stand his fucking sweaters. Hated those fucking sweaters. I didn't like his little short afro. He was weird to me. He seemed skeezy. I didn't trust him. But it's because I grew up, I grew up in the hood. I grew up where folks like Cliff and the Cosbys were folks who looked down at folks like me.
Right.
You know, I was the character that they would write into the show every few weeks to remind the kids on the show that they were wealthy. You know how they always had that kid like, oh, they don't have the stuff you have, and that was a lesson for the week. Mm-hmm. I was that kid. And so it was really hard to watch. I know it was hard to watch the Cosby Show for me, but yeah, I mean, go ahead. You continue. The questions in your corner. You continue.
Well, okay. So like I said, Cosby was a big one. And I think also the timing, because that came out, if I remember correctly, it came out in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So when it really first came on and it had that really, really terrible 80s looking like theme song, if y'all remember, it looked really bad and it had like the people shifting. It was really bad. They had a lot of
they themes had multiple on the theme shows?
Like every 2 years they changed
it
up.
I thought it was always in dancing people on that white screen.
No, that was the most famous one. But like the first one looked real. Like you remember what pictures looked like in the 80s? Like and they had like those lasers in the background and stuff. It was that kind of quality. It was a mess.
I believe it.
But like the point was that it came out in that late 80s time frame. So for us, I mean, we were still little kids. So for me, that was really something that was present for a long period of time,
right?
For me as a kid, seeing a dominant male figure on TV. But I would say, and I wouldn't say this as a father, I would say for masculinity purposes, the flip side of that for me was Martin, because I feel like when Martin came on TV, it was personality. Like he was brash and he was loud, but he was also very, very headstrong in achieving what he wanted to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the big part of Martin. When you think about his character on the show, it was him in his career and all the steps he did in his career and how that was basically the majority of his life. And then it was also his relationship with Gina. Mm-hmm. And that relationship was he was very, I would say, like uber masculine.
Yeah.
It was very sexual.
And toxic as fuck.
Yes, very toxic, very demeaning in a lot of ways. Gina was reduced in a lot of ways to body parts.
Lips, hips, thighs,
head.
Eyes.
I mean, that was kind of her role on the show for Martin was, this is someone that I'm going to take to the bedroom. I can't remember how many times on that show it was nasty. Like, okay, let's go to the bedroom now. And that was the end of the scene.
Oh, Jesus, like, girl. Ciao.
And so when you think about that, when you think about as a kid watching, I mean, because we were
I'm so triggered right now.
Like junior high school when that was big. I mean, that's puberty time. That's when, people start really thinking about real relationships and the formative years of that. And that's what we're watching on TV.
Right.
Problematic.
So then I'm wondering, so back to my second question then, thinking about what parts to think of as toxic and what parts as non-toxic, what parts to keep and what parts to throw out. Because I think that when you think about this show as someone who is masculine, right, versus someone who is feminine, you're talking about Martin. For me, my experience with that show is going to be very different from yours.
Right.
Right? So then what do you take away from a show like that?
What is tragic, I think, at the time, for me, as I was really trying to come into what I thought my manhood was, relationships and courting and all that stuff is a big part of that. And so part of thinking back at that time, I really thought to some degree that I had to take on some of those roles and some of those attitudes because that's what manhood was.
Right.
And I think that's the other thing to note here is like we're talking about entertainment and all the messages and things that we see in entertainment. But we also have to note that those things are then reinforced partly by the collective watching of these things and how we repeat the things that they say in groups and circles.
Absolutely.
And those jokes. And then also in life and how we operate in those same ways. And we see people like, oh, that guy's just like Martin.
1996, my signature phrase was damn Gina.
Right.
Anything that happened, I said damn Gina. And everybody laughed.
And you're not at that age. You're not at a point where you can be critical about
no clue.
No
clue. And I think it's interesting because so toxic masculinity is interesting because we talk about masculinity, and in my opinion, most of masculinity is toxic. Like I have the opinion that masculinity, it's hard to find a version of masculinity that isn't actually toxic, because so much of masculinity is based on performance of strength and performance of dominance and power over someone who is perceived, or others, or a group of people who are perceived as weaker, people who are perceived as incapable of taking care of themselves. And masculinity is not always just about gender. So it's not like, it's about a gender binary, we don't subscribe to that anyway, but like, it's not a male female conversation. It's about how one in any human body embodies a masculine presenting persona, and the ways that society often, privileges folks who present as masculine.
Right.
And that's why I was really thinking about this episode and how we're going to go at it, because I remember for me, like I said, Cosby, I didn't trust that nigga. I was like, fuck this dude. I mean, I always remember thinking like, yo, like Claire is way finer than him. And like,
and a boss. Too.
And way smarter than this dude. And what the fuck is she doing with him? Like this don't make no sense.
Well, and I think that's the other thing that always gets me about these shows, is because I would have those same thoughts. Right. And I think that's something that's also permeated through culture and society, is that you can make up for it, right? Like,
right, because you're funny.
I got a good job. Like, so I can be a trash-ass individual, but, I got a good job, and my car looks right, and I got these good benefits, so...
Right,
and I keep my hair cut low, or,
Right, and it's not just the phenotypical thing, right? So, like, Cosby's not my cup of tea looking-wise, and obviously he's a trash-ass person. We know what's happening with him now, but not just phenotypically, but, like, he wasn't actually particularly charismatic. That goofy, corny, like, goofy face he makes when he's eating Jell-O, that shit is not cute. There's nothing debonair about fucking Bill Cosby. Like, no one's going to tell me that there's anything cute about this nigga. And I think for me, like, I remember watching the show and be like, dude, this is a goofball. Like, this is a legit goofball. Some people are into that or whatever, but Claire was just like popping, and like, she was so fine. And I was just like, man, she
ran everything.
Oh my God. And I think that's the thing, like, same thing goes for Martin. Like, Gina was fine. Gina is fine. Pam, fine. Everybody else was better looking on the show than Martin.
Well, right. I mean, and when you think about Gina, like, she was a high-powered ad executive. Right. You remember that? She was always going to work in them suits. And when they showed her...
With them shoulder pads.
Yes. And when she was at work, when they had those scenes at work with her and Pam, who worked at the same firm,
right?
They were like running business meetings, like high-powered business meetings of like ad campaigns. I mean, they were doing like real hardcore work.
And Pam was very smart.
She was,
right?
But the focus was always, Martin, he got a radio show. Like romanticizing the idea that he's in him, he's doing something so much cooler and so much better than just this little job to the side.
And that's my point. Like, I feel like we're suggesting that masculinity in and of itself is not toxic, right? That masculinity all by itself is like benign, right? And I think that there are ways that we can trouble that concept. We can think about masculinity and say, sure, if we're thinking about masculinity just as the way one presents oneself, if we think about masculinity as like, the way one dresses or the way one moves throughout the world in terms of one's embodiment, sure. But if that embodiment also involves those types of dominant behaviors, those behaviors that often escalate into a certain type of toxicity that becomes violent, right? It's like, well, then maybe toxic masculinity is not really what we're talking about, right? Maybe what we're talking about is escalated toxic masculinity, or maybe we should start thinking about masculinity as inherently toxic just by the nature of the way we envision being masculine.
Well, and that was the question, right? The question you posed to me was, how did I kind of pick and choose what was good and what was bad and what to remove and what to keep? And for me, I think I had kind of like a crisis, right? Because you have these messages, you have the Martins out there where people are saying that's how you're supposed to be. That's a big, strong man. That's, he really embodying his manhood, right? And so you're kind of told you're supposed to be that way. But then I kind of had that crisis of realizing, well, that's not true to who I actually am as a person.
Right.
And so does that mean that I'm not a man? Does that mean that I'm less, quote unquote, less of a man? Or does it mean, like, what does that actually mean if I don't fit into this paradigm?
Right. What does that mean for folks who identify as male but who do not embody masculine on those terms?
Right.
And that's what I'm wondering. And that's why I think, that's why I think it's interesting when we talk about toxic masculinity. Like, it's a phrase that people throw around a lot right now. And I'm just wondering because it bothers me because I feel like there needs to be some nuance, right? Like, there needs to be some conversation around what makes masculinity toxic and what makes it non-toxic. And is it actually possible? And what is the spectrum, right? Because when I think about you, like when I met you, I didn't go, "Ooh, look at that masculine, manly man." You know, I honestly feel like if you had presented as more masculine, I would not have been into you.
Right.
Because I'm not particularly interested in folks who I personally identify as masculine presenting. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in. What's interesting is that you are read as a heterosexual man, but in some ways you don't subscribe to a lot of those embodiments, right? You don't embody masculinity and heterosexuality and manliness, whatever that is, on the same terms as is often prescribed when those terms are used. And so for me, I always think about like, well, then how do we figure this shit out? Right. Like, and I think the reason why you don't embody them is because growing up in your household, it wasn't like you had anybody to mimic. It wasn't like you had someone like, oh, that's how you be a dad.
Right.
That's how you be a man. That's how you didn't have that, and for me growing up in my household, like I wasn't like, oh, there's a guy and that's what a man's supposed to do when he loves a woman, if that's what, and that's how a heterosexual marriage works. Got it. Like we didn't have a formula for that. And honestly, I think that, I keep thinking about Insecure and Yvonne Orji's role in the show.
Molly.
Yeah, Molly's breakdown and how people were like, oh my gosh, she's being dramatic. And how other people were like, no, it's her whole world is breaking up before her very eyes. And I just feel somewhere in the middle. I kind of feel like, yeah, she absolutely had this example. Molly's parents have been together for 35 years or whatever it is. And, she had this example of marriage and of man and woman and heterosexual coupling. And that's what she had envisioned for herself. And she had marked it down in her book, probably somewhere in a diary, and probably had envisioned the colors of her wedding and what her baby names would be and all that shit.
Probably had like a vision board.
She probably played MASH. And like landed on the mansion and figured out, how many kids they would be and where they work and shit. I don't know what else they have in MASH. I forgot how to play the game. But, she probably had her whole life planned out. And so for her, that probably did rock her whole damn world, But I keep thinking about the ways, what's critically important is like the ways that we are conditioned into these things, right? The ways that we are socialized and conditioned into these states of being. And how we don't come to know otherwise until we're either forced to or until we have to unlearn the shit that we've already learned.
That was kind of what happened for me. For one, like I said, I didn't match
a
lot of the images that I saw. And so I had to decide, okay, am I going to just try and change myself to just be these people? Which honestly is hard in and of itself because these aren't full, whole people.
Right.
Like, their images and their situations and their certain relationships. And if you did try to just embody and be a certain person, you'd have to fill in a lot of gaps.
Right.
So that's already hard in and of itself. But then I had to figure out, okay, well, how do I want to lead my life and how do I want to be? And so part of that was, as you were saying, coming into college, I came in and was like, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to do my best to just be free and find out what that is. The other piece, I think, is that you helped me a lot because you challenged me. Even as we're talking about all these images and things, a lot of these things I think are subliminal, and I think like there's some other shows that we haven't even talked about yet, where I think they kind of subliminally program you into doing things in a certain way that you don't even realize.
Right.
Until someone points it out and says, you do realize that what you're doing is just hurtful and wrong. And you do realize that it's marginalizing me, and then it's prioritizing you over everyone else.
Right.
And that is just an overtly masculine thing to do. And
patriarchal.
Right, and patriarchal. And if you have an actual equally yoked and equally bonded relationship, that wouldn't be present.
Right. All right. So we're back, and it's time to have the conversation. So the conversation will be kind of an extension of what we just talked about a minute ago, but we're going to talk about some concrete examples that we remember from some of our favorite shows. So I am going to talk about Family Matters.
Oh, Family Matters.
Oh, Family Matters. So, two of the most prominent male characters on the show, if you remember, were Karl Malone and Steve. What was Steve's last name?
He was not Karl
Urkel.
Malone.
Oh,
that was Carl Winslow.
Did I say Malone?
You said Karl Malone. This is not basketball.
This is basketball. I'm like NBA jams. Karl Malone. Carl Winslow and Steve Urkel.
There you go.
AKA Stever Urkel. So I was talking to Dan about this episode where Harriet quit.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I'm sick of washing dishes and I'm tired of sweeping all the things. And Eddie, you never clean your room. And Laura, this is your cheerleading outfit and you won't iron it. And and she quit and she was done. And I remember that episode when Harriet quit was one of the first times for me that I saw what gender roles look like.
Right.
It was the first time when I saw, oh, this is what happens when you have a heterosexual coupled household with multiple children. This is the formula that a lot of traditional families try to follow, where the mom, stays at home and cooks and cleans, and the man goes out and does the hard work of the day or whatever it is. Because in my house, I took the trash out and I swept and mopped, and my mom cooked. My mom cooks very well.
Yes.
Very well.
Yes, she does.
And she taught me, and now I cook very well. But we shared chores. So, I always thought that cleaning was a family thing. On Saturday mornings, we would all get up and clean and go to IHOP after and eat pancakes and stuff. So for me, it was like, everybody cleans. But on Family Matters, they didn't. And so I remember this episode because Harriet quit and the house legit broke the fuck down. Like, it was like, oh my God, how do you wash dishes? Oh shit. There's a car. Where does the gas go?
Right.
Oh my God, there's a washing machine. There are bubbles coming out the washing machine. What do we do?
They actually did that on the episode.
I thought so, didn't they? Didn't they have bubbles come out the washing machine? I mean, like literally nobody in the fucking house knew how to wash anything. I mean, it's shocking that they didn't have boo-boo in their drawers, because they probably didn't know how to clean their own asses if Harriet didn't clean their asses. Exactly. You never know. Shit. They might have had boo-boo in their drawers. So what was interesting about the episode is after Harriet quits and everybody is all like, oh, we can't do nothing. Then they basically go, oh, we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We love you. Come back to us. Don't quit or whatever. And then at the end, she's like, oh, thank you. I'll come back. And that was legit the whole fucking answer. It was like, I will now go back into my gender roles to doing all the stuff that you all took me for granted for. And nothing will change. And you all will continue to be trash ass family members who have no capability or responsibility or accountability in your own lives. And I will no longer be trying at all to raise adult people who can take care of their own selves or be a responsible partner to a man who should be able to wash his own damn drawers.
Yeah. I mean, they were incapable.
That was legit the end of the episode. And I remember like being really disappointed with the outcome and feeling like, damn, this heterosexual shit is fucking trash. Like, if getting married means that I have to sit around somewhere and clean somebody's dirty boo-boo drawers, you can keep that shit. Like, you can keep it, like, forever. And it's funny because, like, I remember that episode, the laugh track was popping.
Oh, yeah, there were plenty of opportunities to laugh.
That shit is not funny, though. Like, it's not, I remember I was not really laughing. I did not think that was funny. That episode was probably one of the least funny episodes to me. I remember thinking, y'all are trifling as fuck. Y'all are trifling. Y'all can't use no washing machine. I was washing my own clothes at like 6.
It's not hard.
I think I was washing my own clothes before I was fully potty trained.
It's actually almost foolproof. If you just follow the very simple, basic directions.
It's a washing machine. It's soap and a button.
That's it.
And y'all got bubbles in the kitchen? So the other episode that killed me, it had me, and not in a good way, is when stalker ass Stever Urkel decides that after all these seasons and years and millennia of being a violent invasive stalker person to Laura and her not wanting him. That, and endorsed by the family, by the way.
Right.
So he's stalking her. And everyone's like, oh, that's so cute. And she's like, no, he's in my house and he's coming in my window. Oh, how sweet. No, bitch. Like, there's a whole boy. There's a whole person.
But he was harmless.
Yeah, no. What the fuck? It's like Steve Urkel has to be one of the most threatening characters of the 90s. Like one of the most passively threatening characters. He's like framed to be harmless and he's framed to be like completely nonviolent. But I'm like, it is so violent to have this boy walking around this girl's house against her permission, against her will. Her dad, who reluctantly, but still basically says like, hang out with him. He's weird. Right?
Right.
Her mom, like, oh, he's sweet. Come eat some pie. She always had pie for him.
She really did.
Always feeding this nigga pie. And I'm like, that you don't feed my stalker pie. You send his fucking ass home. Where's his fucking parents? Send his ass home.
We never saw his parents.
Never saw his fucking parents. But he had an auntie.
We did see the auntie.
What was Donna Summer?
Uh-huh.
Yep, she was lit. She should have took his ass home. That's what she should have done. Anyway, so fucking stalker Steve Urkel does all this stalking, right? And then after all these years realizes Laura's like, no, I said no. It's too much good dick out here. Too many fine niggas out here in Letterman jackets. And you're whack.
And Laura was pulling him, if I remember.
Laura was pulling him. Laura was in calculus and biology. Laura was super smart, super pretty. She always had that vertical part on the back of her head with that big hair scrunchie on the top and them scrunchy socks that was mismatched. Laura was in. Okay? Laura was popping.
Beverly was the look.
And her hair was bumped on the end perfectly every week. And she had that little slightly pink lipstick. Laura was popping. So Steve was reaching. What he was doing was reaching. And she didn't want him. She was not interested in him. So he says, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get my ass a whole fucking machine. I'm going to build a whole fucking machine that will genetically alter my DNA and make me into a whole ass new ass person.
Yeah, it's logical.
A whole ass new ass person.
He was trying to shoot a shot.
I will be Stever Urkel. Come on.
I'll never forget that episode too, with all those lights flashing.
He rolled around the floor. I'm like, okay, like, girl.
Oh no, he's dead.
No, he's not dead. He just has a Gumby now. So this nigga comes out of the damn machine wearing linen. Girl, bye. And comes to Laura's birthday party, dances to some damn babyface, this is for the cooling you. And that little weird ass dance he was doing, that like drop your knee ass, weird ass dance. And of course, Laura falls in love because he doesn't look like Steve now.
No.
Bitch, this is not Superman. You can't just take off your glasses. You're not fucking Clark Kent. We know it's you, Steve. What are you doing? You're just standing up straight and took your suspenders off. What the fuck are you doing? And just think about how problematic this is. Like, Stefan was really chauvinistic, very materialistic, very shallow, had nothing of any importance to say. Kind of a fucking dick, right? And of course, Laura's like sprung. But then over time, she begins to fall in love with Steve. Girl, child. Anyway. And wants to basically merge Stefan and Steve into the same person.
Right. Because there were some redeeming facts.
There's some redeeming values in this stalker. Listen, this is the 90s, and this is what we have here. We have a show probably, I would argue, one of the most prominent and like most popular Black kind of nuclear family, like respectable shows of the 90s, like Cosby aside or whatever the fuck.
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely.
Right. It came on TGI Friday.
Yeah, this was ABC. I mean,
right.
This was the wholesome, 2 hours of the week.
Right. This is fucking mainstream.
Right.
And they're telling us that women belong in the kitchen. And, Rachel, though, she was allowed to go buy a whole damn restaurant. Right. Mm-hmm. She could have a whole restaurant. But, Harriet, she's supposed to be at home washing boo-boo drawers.
But Rachel's role on the show up until that point was, I'm a single mother.
Right.
Is living on you.
Right.
So.
Right. And if you remember correctly, Carl and Harriet helped her buy the damn restaurant.
Exactly.
Listen,
she couldn't get it without their money.
You know what? I'm done. And then we got Stefan, and we're supposed to believe that Laura's just gonna fall for Stefan. Because I guess secretly she really loves Steve. And then at the end of the whole damn show, she picks Steve. And that's what we're supposed to be like all happy about. We're supposed to be happy at the end of the show when she picks her stalker of like 15 years.
Right.
15 years she's been stalked by this child. And she picks him and we're like, and they had a nerve to be at like Disneyland with fireworks in the back. Girl, goodbye. 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 So I'm just concerned because I feel like in a lot of ways, like that was one of my first examples of like, oh, this is how the heteros do it. Like this is how it really is. And what's funny is like, it's just like a Disney movie. I mean, that's kind of the story of Beauty and the Beast, right? I mean, Belle, she got Gaston or the Beast. And on one side, she got a violent predator. On the other side, she got a violent predator with fur.
Which one do you choose?
Which one do you choose?
Pick your adventure.
And I'm like, and it's really disturbing because when you really think about like how we learn masculinity and like how we learn like, and this is I think the reason why these stories are kind of like more dangerous is because they are implicit and they're unstated. And there's a way that they made Steve and Stefan seem normal.
Right.
Right. They made Steve this kid who's nerdy, but who has really predatory actions, who's really harming Laura every single day.
Well, and even, honestly, even in you talking about it, the thing that is striking to me is you think, it puts me in the mindset of people that are catcalling on the street. Right. And the idea that I can keep catcalling and catcalling and catcalling and catcalling, and eventually I'll just win you over, and then we'll be in love, and it'll all work out. Right. Just like Steve. Like somehow, if I just keep fighting, and I just keep pushing, and I just keep putting myself in your space and invading you in all these different ways, eventually I'll just break you down and make you realize that you do like me. Girl, and you do want to be with me.
And he said that shit too. I'm wearing you down.
That was his line.
That shit was creepy as fuck. Like, is that how you really want to get somebody? By wearing them down? What are we doing?
That's the messaging and the programming.
Listen, and I think that's the thing is like, it's the messaging and the programming, but it's not just the messaging and the programming, to your point, that's kind of what catcalling is, right? I mean, catcalling and like, I mean, I had someone who was stalking me in high school. When I was 15, I had a dude that legit like was following me to the nail shop and following me from the bus stop to like church. And listen, Oakland is not that big, but it's not small either. No. My nail shop was legit like on East 14th and Fruitvale. My church was in North Oakland off of Broadway and Telegraph. I'm like, East Oakland to International Boulevard, East 14th to North Oakland. I'm like, you legit are working to stalk me. This is work. You're putting in work and time and money at this. Mm-hmm. That shit is scary. That's scary. And so I feel like when you watch shows like that though, and you see that Steve is doing this, and then in the end, Laura picks Steve, then what does it tell like young boys and girls, you know, folks cross the binary, but specifically young boys and girls who identify along the binary, who are heterosexual coupling, who are watching these types of messages about dating? What does it teach boys how to treat girls and how girls how to be treated by boys? And
I can tell you what the messaging is. It's telling people that that's how you earn someone. Right. Like it's how you find someone to couple with and be with and find love is by earning it. And earning it is basically just putting in a lot of time, money, and effort. And the more you put in, the more you can expect to get out. And that's why we have people who put in a lot of time, money, and effort and are touched. And then when they don't get what they want, they lose their minds. Right. Because they feel like, this is mine. I earned it. Right. Why aren't you giving it to me?
And it's due. That's when masculinity becomes toxic.
Exactly.
Right. Right. It's interesting because I think that Family Matters was one of those shows that people see as kind of monotonous and like, oh, there wasn't anything going on there. You know, there's nothing serious. But when you really start to break down those characters, it's like, no, that actually was some really violent shit that we were watching. Right. Same thing goes for Living Single.
Oh man.
And this
one is tough.
This one hurts.
I love Living Single.
Me too.
I mean, I love that show. And especially when you think about it, it was a show that was led by 4 Black women.
Right.
They were the 4 Black leads of the show.
Right.
They were the stars. And not even just that they were stars, but they were out in the world. They were working. In a lot of ways, they were dating on their own terms.
Yeah.
They decided yes, no, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen.
Regine was lit.
I mean, she was like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna be dressed to the nines.
Yep.
And I'm gonna pull whoever I want to pull. And when I'm done, then I'm done, and I'm gonna go on to the next one because you're not on my level. All 4 were like that to some degree. They really had a standard that they were trying to achieve, and if you didn't meet that standard, then you were cut off and put to the side.
Right.
But the flip side of that is, their neighbors, Overton and Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
Both, I think, really beloved characters on the show.
Mm-hmm. I
think they brought a lot of funny to the show. They were great. But when you really think about it, were really toxic in their own ways.
Absolutely.
So first, obviously, I think I want to go with Overton because, I mean, everyone loved Overton. He kind of had that Southern quality to him that people always find so endearing, that he's just a simple man and he has simple needs and he's a handyman and he has a hammer, and he was clearly infatuated with Sinclair, and I think did a good job of not necessarily really bringing that same predatory aspect like you said Steve had, but more so really trying to respect her, but in a lot of ways really kind of making a lot of traditional rules and values and ways in which their relationship was going to be structured.
Absolutely.
And I think especially once they were in a relationship, I think that stuff kind of came to the forefront more. I think their relationship was really cute and playful as, they were trying to figure out, do I like him? Does he like me? Well, what do we do? We're stuck in a room together. Are we going to kiss? Like that was, I think they made that very, very innocent. And so we didn't see that toxicity really come out until they were actually really coupled together in a relationship.
Right.
And then for Kyle, his whole role was the serial dater. He was all about his little black book and whichever person he was bringing to whichever event. And that was kind of his whole thing. It's like, I'm going to go out here. I can get any woman. I'm just so sexed up. And that was his whole kind of presence. And that was his whole kind of character. And he even brought that into his kind of clashes with Maxine.
Right.
Where they were constantly trying to kind of one-up themselves. And Maxine was always trying to undermine his masculinity in that way to say, oh, well, people don't really want you and you're not really that great. And you're not. And he was always trying to then prove like how attractive he was and how desirable he was and how everyone just really wanted him so bad. Mm-hmm. Which... it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before of how people put on these roles and these attitudes of what they think a man is supposed to be. And I feel like when they were building that character for the show, they basically said, let's take all the things that, are mannish and just make that into a person. And when you think about how these characters played out, these kind of roles on the show, It's almost like just like we were talking about Family Matters, where they kind of make these things to seem light and comical, when what's actually happening is pretty sinister. One of the big episodes I remember from Living Single is when Overton and Sinclair had that will they won't they thing going on, and I think they had actually really kind of just started dating, and the episode was about Sinclair trying to assert herself more. So she had all of her friends really trying to say, Sinclair, if you want something, you say that you want it and you go after it and you do it, and you have to kind of assert yourself and make yourself known in this relationship. You can't just kind of follow behind Overton and do whatever he says.
Right.
And then I think they had a disagreement, if I remember correctly, and then they were both really sad and torn up about the whole thing, about the fact that they disagreed. And then they kind of went to their corners where Sinclair was talking to her friends and then Overton was talking to Kyle. And Kyle was really trying to gas Overton up about, you know what, you man up.
You're the man.
And you be the man and you be strong and you put your foot down and you let her know who's boss. And right. And that's that same thing of trying to say that's what masculinity is. And trying to cast that as a good thing, or how that's how things are supposed to be, which is really funny, especially when you think about what happened with Kyle later on in the series, right?
Right.
So once him and Max kind of got over all of their clashes and really kind of became a couple and admitted that they liked each other, his whole character flipped Kyle went from being the guy that was just always chasing women around, always got a new date for the night, into being the guy that was willing to risk it all. He would move anywhere across the world, do whatever he had to do to get Maxine and prove his love to her.
Right.
Right. And I think it's interesting, number one, that his character was able to change around that quickly, and that was just an okay thing to accept. Like the person he was for the last couple of years was just all fake and phony.
But I think that's what they wanted us to believe, right? They wanted us to believe that was all performance, and like deep down, Kyle was like secretly like this really great guy, and Maxine was just able to pull it out of him.
It's that heart of gold thing. Like, oh, he's so redeemable because there's some goodness underneath all of that shit.
Right. Right.
But then they cast Maxine as if, oh, well, now that she's got him, now, oh, she doesn't know what she wants to do, and she's all wishy-washy, and almost making her, kind of putting her in a negative light, and really making Kyle look like, the knight in shining armor.
Right. Right. And I think it's interesting because, like, I loved Living Single. Like, I loved that show so much. I was so sad when it went off the air, and I feel like it was just like majorly slept on. But the male characters were literally my least favorite parts of the show. Like, I could have just done without them. I just did not think that they needed to be there. I thought that Overton made Sinclair's character weird and like not like she was so funny on her own, and then Overton would show up and I'm like, ugh. And this is before DVR, so I couldn't fast forward his ass.
Exactly.
Right? And I like Kyle. I mean, Kyle was okay, but I always remember being like, I'm telling you, listen, Maxine fine. And I was like, Kyle, okay, girl. I mean, sure, if you want that. I mean, it's one of those things like, Overton cute and stuff because he, light skin, had a bald head, and everybody thought he was cute in his little overalls and shit. I was into that shit, but I think the other issue is that I'm just super, super queer. So like, I'd be watching all these shows, not be looking at the women like, damn, she fine. And then I see these dudes and I'm like, no. But like, I think one of the big things about Overton and Kyle was that because there were so few males on the show, they tried to do so much with masculinity in just those two people.
Right.
And they tried, like, they had 4 leading women, and so they could do a lot with femininity, right? So they had a lot to do. That they could have Regine, who was really kind of the feminist icon on the show, and so was in a lot of senses. So was Khadijah. Khadijah was a feminist, but she was also, I would say, she was kind of genderqueer. She was very, to me, genderqueer. Yeah. And she wasn't like where Regine was more hypersexed. Khadijah was very understated and sexually. And, Sinclair was like the silly friend. And, Max was like, fuck everybody. I'm getting mine. I'm a high powered. Was she a lawyer?
Yeah.
High powered lawyer.
High powered lawyer.
And I'm wearing my business suit with my briefcase. It was her briefcase. I was like, I saw that briefcase and I'm like, I need to have a briefcase when I grow up. I must have a briefcase, And I think it's interesting when we think about these characters and the fact that Kyle and Carl are both played by men who are queer in real life.
Right.
And how, like, I think during the show that came out, I remember when I was a kid and finding out that Carl in real life was gay. And for me, that was exciting. I was like, oh, well, that's dope. But then I was like, oh, but that's sad. Like, because it was like, because I don't think there were any non-heterosexual couples on any mainstream TV show that I can remember. I mean, Will and Grace came out when we were kids, but they were white and they weren't like coupled. So it was like he was the gay friend to Grace. So like, I don't know that there were any non-heterosexual like couples of color at all.
No, and I actually distinctly remember, I can't remember exactly what happened on Living Single or what the assertion was. And I think this probably happened more than once, but I remember Overton having reactions like, nah, dog, you overstep, and that's not, really, if there's any type of kind of queer assertion or even illusion, that whole like no homo kind of was really prevalent.
I feel like Martin had that a lot too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Martin had that a lot too. And so it's just one of those things where like, I understand it was the 90s, and so we have these kind of cultural artifacts and we love them. Like we love Family Matters. We love, Living Single. Some folks love Cosby Show. I can't relate. Some folks love Martin. Fresh Prince.
Man.
Rock.
Oh, man,
Rock was lit. Thea. Hanging with Mr. Cooper. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of stuff that culturally, we digested back then. And we're very integral in shaping how we came to learn about masculinity, including things that were not entertainment, like, church.
Right.
I know for me, I learned a lot about men and masculinity from church. I learned because most of my pulpit was men. Actually, I think all of them were men. Yeah. I don't think there was a single non-male person in the pulpit growing up. So pretty much all the leadership positions at the top leadership of my church were men. And I learned very early not to challenge that, not to challenge them, not to challenge their role, not to challenge their perceived calling to do the job, So it's like you have these kind of if you grow up not around a lot of dudes, and the ones you interact with are either on your TV doing this shit and in your church, saying, God has called me and you can't challenge me. It's like, well, damn. That's pretty limiting.
Right. And I think that church aspect is a really important one to note too. For me, growing up, the church was a place where a lot of my male, in-person role models were. These were people, as you said, I saw them in leadership positions. I saw them doing things for other people, being helpful, being kind. And so I kind of saw those as some of those male figures that I could kind of follow after. But at the same time, when you think about a church and how a church is built up and how a lot of Christianity is based on patriarchy, there's something underneath that of these men are supposed to be the leaders. They are the ones that are supposed to be in charge and supposed to be in front. So even if, they were the best people in the world, there's kind of a greater, bigger story there of how, oh, well, I'm a man and I'm leading these initiatives. And so, you can train up under me and then you could be the next man in line to be the person that leads the initiative, down the line. This whole idea of men raising men and bringing them into the fullness of who they are supposed to be, and how we're really directed by what they think a man is or what they believe a man is. And a lot of times their ideas of what a man is came, straight verbatim out of the Bible, which we know if you read,
can be very problematic.
Right. It's very patriarchal. If you read it word for word and you don't take it for the concepts, that's what it is. And then also by men who had similar patriarchal and toxic views, growing up themselves.
Right. I don't know. I just think that it's a bigger conversation that we have to have. And I know that's very taboo. You don't want to reinforce the stereotype that Black men are not present in the lives of their kids and stuff. And I don't think that's what we're trying to say at all. I know that's my experience and that's your experience, but that's not the experience, right?
Right.
And I know that what we're really trying to get at is that there's ways to imagine otherwise. I'm very big on how do we imagine otherwise? And, for us not having our dads around, you learn to just do without and you learn to survive. Right? You figure out innovative ways to figure out how to do the things you would have done had they been there. And I think that we both learned masculinity in ways that probably are very non-traditional.
Right.
Right. And it's probably it cracks me up with people parents need to have a role in their kid's life. And I'm just I really hate that shit. I hate when people say that. Which parents? Not everybody has parents. Not everybody has two parents. Sometimes they're raised by grandparents, aunties, cousins, uncles, friends, fosters, adoptives, whatever. You don't know people's life situation. You don't know what is happening in somebody's household. You don't know what people are living in, with, and through. And I feel a lot of times, in our feeble attempts to debunk stereotypes all the time, because I feel some of these stereotypes are legit real and based on some real shit. I'm not saying all stereotypes are real and based on real shit, but shit, some of them fit me pretty well. And I'm cool with that. I'm totally okay with being a stereotype sometimes. I'm fine with that. for me, like, rather than spending my time trying to debunk a stereotype about being someone who grew up without their dad present, I'd rather spend more time reflecting on the ways that I figured out how to be and come into the fullness of my Blackness despite that perceived absence, right? Like, it's not like I have some gap in my life where I'm just like, woe is me. I don't perceive myself as being, as missing something. I don't perceive myself as being incomplete in any way. I know my dad's passed on, but I had a relationship with my dad before he passed on, and it wasn't the best relationship, but it was a relationship, and it's my life, and it's my story. Right. And I feel like there's a lot of ways that people, specifically Black people, with these narratives and shit, we get hung up on like that Cosby shit, that like, how do we make this respectable? How do we, check for this white gaze and make this sound better? Because, the whites are looking or whatever. And I'm just like, I would rather spend my time trying to figure out how I'm navigating my life on the terms that work best for me, showing up in my life in the way that works best for me and for the people around me, and learning to love myself and learning to love other Black people on the terms that work best for us, than checking for what the fuck, somebody else outside my community thinks about my upbringing or like how this looks on a paper,
And honestly, I struggled with that for a long time, where, especially that, like we're talking about, looking at these shows and seeing these nuclear families and thinking, okay, well, I don't have that. And trying to conceptualize, what am I missing out on? What would I have had if my life was built differently? How would I have come out? Who would I have been? And thinking, man, there's all this stuff that I just missed out on. And I'm just always going to have these voids and these places where these experiences that I just won't know. But then, coming into the realization of, yeah, I didn't have those experiences, but I had other ones that other people won't have. I
Beautiful
had other
ones.
Great, wonderful people in my life that nurtured me and poured into me and told me I was great.
Right.
And, just because I didn't have some experiences doesn't mean that I'm missing or lacking. I just had different ones, and they made me who I am today, and I think who I am is great.
I do too.
Oh, thank y'all.
Like what you hear? You can find my mom and dad, aka That Black Couple, on the web at thatblackcouple.com. You can find them on Facebook at That Black Couple, and you can find them on Instagram and Twitter at That BLK Couple. If you have questions or comments about the show, email them at thatblkcouple@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back. So it's time for us to reflect on toxic masculinity in the Black family. And we talked about, where we learned about toxic masculinity, where we learned about masculinity. We talked about some shows and the Black church and our experiences with that. So I think my reflection today about this topic is really about the sanctity of the household and how, I always talk about my upbringing and living with a single mom and how it was usually like me and her in the house. And even like, my uncle lived with us for a while. My brother lived with us for a while. But really a lot of my childhood was spent just me and my mom. And even when my uncle and my brother lived there, my dad had built like a really big, like kind of apartment in the back of the house that was separate from the house. So like me and my mom were like in the house together. So it still was just me and my mom. Like, I think for me, what that meant was that it was really just a bunch of like feminist ass kikiing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a really safe space. And so when it came time to talk about like race and gender and sexuality, drugs, money, shit, everything, it was always through a feminist lens. And so like my mom, she I don't think she like directly identified herself as a feminist. And I don't think she knew she was a feminist, but she had read like Angela Davis and shit, and she knew who Assata was. I mean, this is Oakland in the 80s and 90s, so everyone knows about the Black Panthers, and yeah, so she knows this stuff, and she's experienced it firsthand. And so, you know, when I grew my hair out and cut all my perm off, and she was like, "Oh my God, you like a little Angela Davis," you know? And so in living in a household like that, it was a safe space. It was a very safe space. And I think that masculinity never actually entered the household, toxic or otherwise, you know? So I think for me, it allowed me a lot of space to learn about who I was and how masculinity was going to show up for me. Because I don't think I'm traditionally feminine. I don't think that I have any type of particular embodiment of femininity that is like along a traditional feminine.
Yeah.
You know, I was 6'2" at like 12, and I was like 5'5" at 10. So I never really like, my body was like, "Nah, girl, no." You know, and so, and you know, and I played basketball all the way through 8th grade. So for me, and having a really genderqueer-esque body all through high school that was read often as masculine, it allowed me, growing up in the household with my mom, it allowed me the space to really explore, you know, what that was going to mean for me as an adult. And I'm really grateful for that. Like, I'm really grateful to have had that time and to have a mother who was not the Harriet Winslow. She was not into gender roles.
Yeah.
She had, by nature, she couldn't be. Like, she just had to get shit done. The house just had to be clean. Food just had to be cooked. Stuff that had to be paid for. Like, bills had to be paid. And I had to be autonomous. You know, she didn't have time to teach me how to be a stay-at-home mom. Or teach me how to, like, you know, because she was like, I remember I was like 11 years old. And she was like, "You better take care of yourself. Because ain't nobody going to take care of you like you." That's one of the earliest lessons she gave me.
Yep.
She was like, when you turn 15, we're going to the bank and you're opening an account and you're writing checks. You know, like, she taught me how to mail letters. She taught me how to put stamps on shit and like mail letters at like 13 years old. She made me start calling and making my own doctor appointments. You know, I ordered my own prescriptions when I got diagnosed with my heart condition. I ordered my own prescriptions. You know, those were the things she had me do, because she's like, you are not going to be out in these streets and not be able to take care of yourself. And so I feel like in a lot of respects, like, that's something I am so eternally grateful for, because I grew up in a household with a mom who just really did not have time for that shit.
Right.
It really gave me space to be a full human, a full, like, human person.
It's interesting to hear you say those things about your childhood and how you grew up and kind of how your mother shaped you. When I think about my childhood and how my mother shaped me, kind of the same thing where, you know, we didn't have any men in the house. So I didn't have, you know, a male role model to teach me what it was to be a man. And I never asked my mom, how do I be a man? What do I need to do? How do I need to be? Or how do I act? And she never told me either, which I think in a lot of ways people might think is almost like a bad thing. Like, you didn't have any guidance. No one tried to fill that gap for you. But I think, and I've never had this conversation with my mother, so I don't know if she did this on purpose or not. But in the same way your mother did, my mom gave me space. So her thing growing up was, you can do whatever you want to do. Whatever thing you're interested in, we're going to figure it out. We're going to make it work, and you can do it. And gender was never part of the conversation. Like, she never said to me, boys do this, or men are like this. It was always more focused on me and who I was and what I wanted to be, and fulfilling those things, and not necessarily, you know, slotting any of that stuff into a certain gender or any other classification. It was really about exploring me and being who I wanted to be. And looking back on it, I really appreciate that, because it did give me some time and some space to really explore some things and take chances and say, yeah, I want to do this. And not second guess it and think, oh, well, if I do this, will people think this about me, or will it mean that? But really just saying, this is something that I have an interest in. This is something that I want to do. This is how I want to be. And then just fully exploring that. I mean, I think about thinking about my childhood now and the stuff that I did. A lot of stuff in stereotypical ways, people look at it and say, "Oh, well, that's gay." You know, like
I hate that shit.
Which I know it's painful for me to even say it out loud because I don't even like saying that because it's just a horrible thing. But you know, I was really into music. You know, I was playing instruments, and what I really love to do is I love to be in choirs. I love to be in choirs. And, you know,
because you can sing.
Yeah, because I like to sing. I think I can hold a tune.
You sing pretty well.
Yeah, but a lot of times when you're in choirs, people. You know, the stereotype that goes along with that is, all the guys in the choir are all the gay boys. And then, you know, and that's just kind of one of their havens where they all hang out.
Right. And embedded in that is this implication that something is wrong with you being a gay boy.
Right.
Right. And if you had been gay, that there's something inherently bad about that. And
that in being gay, right, the sinister part of that is that in being gay, that means you're less masculine.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But I mean, that was what I like to do. You know, I sang at church, I sang at school, I played instruments. I was all into that stuff, and I never thought about how that looked to anyone else.
Because you didn't come home and have somebody telling you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's looking back on it now, it's one of those things you don't think about it at the time, but looking back on it now, I think, wow, how amazing that was. That as a kid, I mean, literally all the way through the time that I moved out of my house, going to college, I never had to think about how my choices and how my interest in who I'm becoming looks to someone else, and if that undermines like who I am as a man or a boy or whatever identity that, you know, I wanted to take on. Right, because you were accepted as you were. Right. Like we all should be. Right. Well, I think we should end there. Okay, I'm cool with that. You cool with that? Yeah. Okay, so y'all, this has been a great episode. Thank you for joining us so much. I want you to make sure that you are looking for more episodes. Follow us on SoundCloud. Also look for us on Google Play because we are up there. You can find us on Instagram, and you can find us on Twitter at @BLKCouple. You can find us on Facebook at @ThatBlackCouple, and on the web at thatblackcouple.com. Bye.